Dennis, I would give this video an S tier.
All right, it's a bold prediction. We'll see how it turns out. So this week we're doing a Shadowlands dungeons. Ranking is part of it, but we're also going to talk about which specific parts of these dungeons we especially enjoyed or didn't enjoy, and what we're kind of hoping for going forward into Dragonflight off of this.
I also made a video at the beginning of the expansion during the beta, and we're going to take a look at that after we're done re-ranking these, talking about the things we liked and didn't like, and seeing how well, or maybe not well, it potentially aged. So that will be interesting at the end of this video. So I guess at the beginning, do you want to start with the other side?
Yeah, I think DOS is a good place to start. I think my biggest problem with this dungeon is like length of dungeon.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure I'm a fan of the boss encounters as well.
So
how do you feel about them?
I think that for me, it was like length of the dungeon was part of it, and the amount of backtracking that you had to do in here really made the timer feel pretty tough. I specifically didn't like the Mechagon wing. Just the design of a lot of the trash was,
for lack of better sight haywire cast, the lubricate self-repair cycle cast, the triple sentient oil pack. Yeah, it's that wing is kind of I mean, there's a reason we just like skip it, right? Everybody does, and anytime you're trying to push keys, right?
So they designed a whole wing that basically you either are going to skip or you're going to pull like one mob at a time, and that's going to be inefficient. And that by itself is not fun. And then I think that the boss encounters themselves are mostly okay so Moizala and Hakar are obviously, I think, the two offenders. I don't think Dealer or Mana Storms, would you agree? I don't think that those are very problematic.
Yeah, Mana Storms I think is one that can be surprisingly brutal, but I don't think it's especially I
don't think it's a problem though.
Yeah.
So like Hakar by design, I think that like they just need to really be careful with shields moving forward. Okay, so this is like one of the mechanics. Like if they're going to continue to put shields on bosses, they have to be able to like not have it to where you are having the boss chain cast a shield moving forward. They did
fix that. Yeah,
but they really need to be cognizant of it, because we've seen it with like Siege of Borealis. We saw bosses get like 6 phases in Siege of Borealis, like multiple and like stuff like that. You have to be very careful.
There's an effect, right, where it's like if you have to DPS through a shield every 30 seconds or adds every 30 seconds, as the key level goes up, your damage to the boss you don't just need to do 8% more damage if the dungeon gets 8% more health, right? You actually have to take way more time because you're getting more shield casts and you're then dumping more damage into those. Then you have less time between each shield cast. And yeah, so that is, I think, something that would be good to always have. But I do think the fix they ended up pushing to Hakar, I think it's in a fine spot now as an encounter. So
yeah, I think that it's mostly fine. And then for Moizala, did you have any what problems did you have with that boss?
I was fine on Moizala. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it was one of my favorite encounters.
Sure.
But I don't think I have any structural things to point to. I think actually as a tank, I quite liked the tank smash one, although I feel like if they want to make those kinds of effects more telegraphed and easy to see for people to understand what's killing their tank, would have probably been good, because like especially in season 1 when tanks were squishy, that was something that was just murdering tanks, was the Moizala bonk 0.5 second cast. If you don't have a Little Wigs timer for that, you're out of here.
I think the upsides of DOS were like pull sizing for a decent amount of the dungeon. Okay,
yeah, so the Ardenweld wing, right?
The Mana Storms wing, bad. Like the pull sizing there is pretty bad. I think that like even like the Death Speaker pulls, you would normally do like a decently sized pull into the Death Speakers. I thought that pull sizing was pretty reasonable. The Ardenweld wing was obviously the most fun that you would have in that key, just generally dealing with a bunch of those birds. I thought that how you would utilize the urn, I didn't love Covenant specific dungeon buffs just as a general rule, but I thought that how you would utilize the urn specifically for those pulls was also pretty decent. I don't like that was tied into a Covenant buff though.
I will say I think this was also my favorite encrypted dungeon. Like the dungeon where like going in on encrypted, it was the most fun, because just like you could just kind of improvise if you weren't going into the route, or you could spend an hour looking at MDT and like figuring out where you'd want to use different woe buffs, right? And you do all kinds of cool stuff with it, which partially is a byproduct of those long corridors with the backtracking you were talking about, which is maybe a negative, but I do think that affix it worked really well in this dungeon. It was really fun to zoom around.
Counterpoint was one of the worst, more difficult prideful dungeons because if you spawned your pride at the wrong time or did anything messed up,
or if you wiped to Hakar and didn't have pride for it the second time, all over.
I think personally, I'd probably put this in B.
I think B is fine for this as well. Yeah,
I think it's like relatively average. I think that there were some good points and some bad points. I think that like they needed to be really cognizant of things like Hakar. I'm not in love with like the Moizala kill the ad, commit every single like offensive CD to the totems to be able to get those killed off, and even then sometimes you wouldn't have enough DPS. Obviously that's just a byproduct of like higher key levels, but at the same point it still, my mind, feels a little bit bad. So I think that there were some good points and some bad points.
Yeah, I'd say B, like high B maybe, but yeah, somewhere in there.
Okay, Halls of Atonement. I think this is by far the best dungeon in this expansion, and I would probably be pushing to give this to an S tier. I think just like the open concept layout of this dungeon carries it very hard, and in addition to that, there's a lot of trash mobs that don't do insanely difficult mechanics to the point where you're pull size limited more often than not.
Yeah, it's definitely one where if you think about like adding mobs 6, 7, and 8 to a pull, there are a lot of dungeons where it's just like, well, we don't have interrupt, 6, 7, and 8 available in our party comp, so that doesn't work. Right, exactly. So it's just like, look, you cannot do that, right? It's not a question of like risk versus reward. I do think Halls of Atonement does a really good job of like, okay, you want to add another mob casting Wicked Bolt at your tank, like go for it, right? But it's gonna be it's gonna increase the danger. You want to add another 2 dogs to this pull, like, I mean, if you could do it, go for it, right? But so I think that was a nice part at the start of this dungeon. Towards the end of the dungeon, I think it does weaken quite a bit, right? Obviously you have the first 80% count that I think is really fun to run around and grab and do however you want in there and go in whichever direction you want. But I also think the mandatory curse dispel on the second boss is a pretty big stain on this one as well.
Yeah.
So if you want this thing in S, I don't think I would argue. I would have defaulted this one to A, but
I think that this is S purely based off the fact that like if you're creating a blueprint for an S tier dungeon, it's going to be this. Like the open concept really carries it super heavily, and like the design of trash.
If we need an S tier Shadowlands dungeon, I'm down for it to be Halls of Atonement. But if we want to put something up there with like Freehold Quarterstars, Underrot, whatever you may have disagree about some of those, right? But those sorts of dungeons that people think about, right? Like
I do actually think it's probably up there.
All right, well,
I think even though it has weak points, like you said, like the echelon decurse thing, and then going boss is not my favorite into
actually,
a key.
Yeah, I don't even hate that too much. But yeah,
I think that like stuff like that isn't super.
I think
great.
Like the mandatory skip after the first boss to the second boss as well, with just a bunch of mobs that nobody in their right mind has ever pulled.
That's not great, but I do think that like for a blueprint for an S tier dungeon, there's a lot of that kind of garbage in Freehold too. But I think this is probably S.
Okay.
Mist Tyranid Scythe. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, so Mist does a couple of things that I don't like, and yet still I have a pretty positive sentiment when I think about this dungeon. Okay. So offense number 1, first boss scales to unfun as probably the quickest, but this is probably the boss on the lowest key level on like a tyrannical week where you will start to be like, what am I doing here? Why am I playing this? In my opinion, so that part's not great. I think the way the maze operates as well is fairly limiting, and now players have found ways to pull through the walls and stuff as the expansion's gone on and those sorts of things. But assuming we're just in a group that's doing this dungeon as it's normally intended, you're just running through, pulling one pack at a time in there with, you're just like fully on rails during that portion of the dungeon. I will say I like the Gorm area a lot. I think those pulls are a lot of fun. The start of the dungeon with the Tyranid villager pulls, again, those feel like pretty mandatory skips, or at least they especially felt that way before this patch. Nowadays, you can fight 1 or 2 villager pulls, and it's actually like it's not bad, but it definitely used to be real bad.
I think that the first boss, it felt like it was scaled for Prideful, so Prideful, Holy Paladin, Moonkin were things that absolutely just destroyed the first boss in Mists in season 1, and you would be able to one phase it fairly consistently. And then after those things got taken away, or like they fell out of favor, the amount of burst DPS that you had for the first boss certainly became a problem. I think for me, the first boss length, I think that could have been addressed in like some tuning stuff. That's a little bit less egregious. I'm not a fan of the maze just by design. I think that like mandatory.
I actually like the puzzle segment part of it as well. I just wish that wasn't tied to like which room you're entering that pulls one pack at a time. But I do kind of like the idea. Like I like the idea of maybe a puzzle that like gives you, you know, a maze where you can kind of go in different directions, and like what is in the rooms maybe you can figure out by doing a puzzle, and you can open multiple of them at the same time or something like that. Like those kind of ideas I think are kind of interesting, but
we're gonna
the
see
way
this,
it actually was done, yeah,
we're gonna see this later. Like almost all trash gauntlets, in my opinion, are unfun for me to play. We're gonna talk about like with Necrotic Wake, things like King's Rest as well, like trash gauntlets where you just have to wait for trash to compete a minigame, or there's just like a timer, a static timer that you have to deal with, is always going to be reducing points for me. And then on top of that, the disparity between which run you would get from time to time, whether it be the Gorge Gullet, whether it be the dragon, or whether it be the Hydra, that felt really egregious. Obviously, it doesn't impact most players, but on the high end, like the dragon can be a 1 to 2 minute difference, just due to that mob is just so bad. Like, and it ends up killing your tank fairly often if you're not super careful.
Brew can't
with
even stagger it for some inexplicable reason.
Yeah,
yeah. I think that this. I think I have a slightly softer version. Like, I don't actually think that trash gauntlets are inherently wrong, or maze type design is inherent. I just think that it's really good if there's an option to speed things up, right? Like if you have an option to take on more risk for more reward. And in Mist, you can kind of do that with pulling through the walls a little bit. But I think, you know, trash gauntlets that have like a gong, right? Like if there was literally just a button that you could press in Wake to just spawn the next trash gauntlet wave before you were done with the previous one and like pull into it or something like that, I'd feel a lot happier about that as well.
I think the Call Gauntlet, the end of Sanguine Depths, is like a good design.
Exactly,
a design
because that one is one where you can do exactly that, right? You can literally like you can go at this. You could literally go call plus the first pack, the second pack without call plus the third pack, the fourth pack without call plus the fifth pack, right? And then the sixth pack without call. Like you could do it that way if you wanted, or you could take call into the first two packs and then chain into the third. Like you can do all kinds of stuff in there depending on how much aggression versus how much safety you're looking for. And I think that when we don't have the option to trade off between aggression and safety, it can be really, it just feels like there's not really a ceiling that is above us, right? In terms of like how we can pull through this dungeon.
Sure. Gore Mary, I do agree. Very large high point to this key. I think that's super sick. There were some limiting factors on pull size, whether it be the staghorns, but overall you were still doing 15-20 mob pulls, and
if you wanted,
really, yeah, exactly. If you wanted, you can't really complain about that. I like Tredova. I think that Tredova as a boss fight actually had a decent number of redeeming qualities. I would be inclined to put this in A, but at the same point, this is one of the dungeons that, like, if you saw like a person having like your weekly key, you're like, all right, let's go do Mists, because more often than not, the timer was free. So I don't know what's like biased or not, but I would put this in A.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard to separate our bias. Like, it is going to be true that just like short, fun dungeons are going to be up points, and long dungeons are going to lose points on that. And like, literally, they should just learn that lesson and make more short dungeons and make less long dungeons.
3 boss dungeon, 30-minute timer, short dungeon. I think that that's also like a high point for this key. So
I think 4 is fine as well. But yeah, like definitely, like, dude, if we're getting it, if the first digit in my timer is a 4, I'm not a happy camper.
What if it's a 45?
Oh, pain.
All right, next up, we got the Necrotic Wake. So I think that this dungeon was heavily inspired by like Toldagor weapons. Toldagor meets weapons, except in a less egregious way, is how I would describe it. So the weapons, notably the Kyrian spear and the Anima orb, were very polarizing for this key for an incredibly long time, and then they just kind of ended up playing the dungeon for you. There was the joke of like, do the Kyrian weapons stream, because they would always be your top DPS in the key, and you'd have to play the weapons. Obviously in 9.0, if you died with a weapon, they went away, which that was pretty egregious. I think that in the future, if they're going to be doing stuff like that, I need to see the power of these reduced. Like, they cannot be as strong as the Goliath orbs, they cannot be as strong as the Anima silence orbs, and they cannot be as strong as the Javelin. It's just one of those things that the amount of power that was put into those weapons in particular was very, very polarizing.
Yeah, it could be fun to execute those pulls and make them work. You know, it's obviously like pulling 20 mobs onto the first boss or whatever with with 5 Kyrian things exploding. Like there's some power and some fun there, but I do think they cause more problems than they to be worth it. Also, as you mentioned, the Trash Gauntlet towards the end of this dungeon, I think, is one of the most especially if you got there fast and then you're just kind of like, one pack at a time, right? These last 3 packs goes on forever, and then like the last bosses are going on forever as well. So yeah, I think that dungeon had a lot of negatives. It did. One positive was you could push it at a fairly high key level. Like this is again like Toldagor, right? One where it's just like, oh, the really top key groups are able to just blast this thing 2 levels above most of the other dungeons because of how powerful the weapons are when used correctly. But I'm not convinced that's a feature as well. I think that might also be a downside.
I mean, that's not even a thing for like most normal groups either, because for the high end groups, they have to commit basically every single weapon to the final 2 bosses, Surgeon Stitchflesh and Nalthor, because like they're going to be wiping to those bosses if they're not like double javelining Surgeon Stitchflesh and stuff like that. But for like average LFG groups, they just wipe to Stitchflesh because that boss is hard. Like that, and that boss is notably incredibly difficult, and that's not like I don't think that's
I don't have a problem with that. Yeah,
I don't have a necessarily a problem with that, but it's one of those things that's just like the weapons are so polarizing, it just becomes a problem where it's like, oh yeah, these people are able to do 31s because they're optimizing it. Things I liked about the dungeon, I actually really like the first pull of this key, and I think that if they're looking for good blueprints for dungeons, a strong first pull that you can reasonably lust, that's nice. Or pop all of your offensive CDs on. That's really, really nice. We see it sometimes in DOS. We see it sometimes in Halls of Atonement where you're ripping just the fattest pull at the beginning and dropping your either your lust, all of your offensive CDs, or both ideally. I think that for Wake, like a nice first pull with a bunch of low impact mobs, it makes that feels kind of decent. The rest of the key, maybe the Narzuda pull is good as well. I think that I'm pretty up with that, but that's also a byproduct of the
do that without a silence anima orb and come back to me.
Yeah, that's a byproduct of the anima orb, but I do like the size of that pull.
I do have one final grievance with this dungeon, which is the Zul'Ramus Gatekeeper mob, criminally overtuned now. I just don't like the idea of putting mobs in dungeons that are just there to like intentionally not be pulled.
Yeah,
and like the way to correctly play against them is to just never pull them.
So is this dungeon just mostly negative then?
I think so. Yeah, I think this is like a C.
I was feeling a C because I don't have like. So the grievances I have with it, I don't like it, but like I don't think
it doesn't incur the like Siege of Borealis vibe in me of
I'm not like it's not like this is unfun. It's not like I don't want to play if I get this key. There's some dungeons in the past where I've had like, okay, I would rather actually just log out than re-roll this key to something else.
King's Rest. Any King's Rest enjoyers? No.
No.
Now there's somebody in the comments already like, well, King's Rest was my favorite dungeon. Shut up.
No, there's not. There is not a King's Rest enjoyer in our comments.
There is. Dude, that comment's already down, I promise.
Our viewers are all intelligent people. They would never say such a thing.
Fair enough.
Plaguefall. Plaguefall's actually gone through a bunch of different iterations of expansion, right? So you want to talk about like 9.0 Plague Boar stuff?
Yeah. So originally there was the unlimited Plague Boar waves, and there were extra rigged Plague Boars and not just like regular Plague Boars.
Yeah.
That were scattered in the first area. So you could make use of those to do a lot of work in the dungeon, right? You'd kill like a tremendous amount of packs with Plague Boars, and that was before even the Echo Great Push Plague Boar the entire dungeon technique, which is obviously extremely, extremely good.
Which that's why I got fixed, by the way. After that,
well, so they moved the Plague Boars to this 4 wave system, which I actually don't hate. I don't hate that you get 4 waves of Plague Boars. Like using those 4 waves intelligently is difficult, rewarding, but I think not like overly rewarding. So I kind of like the version of Plaguefall that exists now in terms of how the Plague Boar strategy works out. My main problem with this dungeon is disease dispel value. I think that's so like if you're trying to do this dungeon without a disease dispel, your tank is just like obligated to kite very early into most pulls in between the first and second boss, and or they're sitting at 30% of their maximum HP, which is death.
I think that disease dispels, they have to be able to be better about like these.
Like they could literally nerf the magnitude of that disease by like a factor of 5 or something, or 3. Like they could cut that disease in half and it would still be impactful. You would still feel it when you had it on you, and it would no longer be a case of like, oh, we can't do this dungeon without a disease dispel, which would be a lot better.
Margrave Stradamus is also like
I'm fine. I'm actually fine with the disease nature of that dot of the infectious rain.
But like it's one of those things that more disease spells kind of trivialize the boss. It's just like it's weird because like if you have, can you imagine if you have 3 diseases spells and that say if you're playing Windwalker, H Priest, Brewmaster Monk, you actually just have the freest time on that fight as opposed to
I actually don't mind like a boss fight getting a lot easier though with disease. Like I think that's the kind of thing. It's like like the fights that Warlock Imps can dispel on. All of these sorts of things are like, I feel like those are kind of like reasonable spot, like one boss long, but like when it's like a whole trash section. I know, especially when it's like a whole dungeon that has multiple different points where diseases are good, that's where Shadama kind of comes in, right? It's like it's the same thing that we valued earlier in the dungeon, rather than like a poison in one spot and a disease later that were really important.
We hadn't talked about this yet for any other key. I think that maybe we should have, but checkpoints in Plaguefall, a crime. Actually just criminally bad. Multiple minute runbacks if you have a full team wipe, like 2-minute runbacks to the point where you're better off just zoning out of this key than committing to the runback. I think that overall, there's a couple of good things. I really like the pull sizing in front of Margrave with all of those. Oh gosh, what are the walker mobs? I don't remember the name of them, and then the blobs as well. I think that both of those are, I think, pretty decent. And then some of the ways that you can end up dealing with Dr. Ickis. I think there's some cool stuff in this key, just generally.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, I think the Plague Boar and like pathing changes. I think that like the ability to be able to path this dungeon not the exact same way every single key is nice. You did have a couple of options, whether or not you pulled the island, whether or not you pulled the pack on the right that's next to the island, like what you would be doing there. Those are a couple of the high points. This one's probably teetering from like C to D in my mind. I don't think it's like, I don't think it's D.
I was thinking C or B, so let's call it a C then.
Okay, we'll call it a C. It's like I don't think it's D, but I like there are a decent number of negative points where I'm like, oh. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Spires of Ascension. I'll field this first. So if Blizzard's watching, you cannot put these angel platforms in the keys. Like something around. You're probably spending, what, 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes just flying. There are multiple 45-plus second just angel travels. So from the first pull to the first boss area, and then from the second boss area to the third boss area, there's just like multiple minutes of travel time. And in addition to that, if you die after the in the third boss area, your checkpoint is literally on the other side of the flight. Like, okay, that by itself should be a crime. Like, and so I just think that these angels in general are really, really, really poorly designed. I understand that from an RP perspective. Spires of Ascension, one of the best looking dungeons of this expansion. I think it is a beautiful dungeon to the point where it ruins some people's FPS and they have to wear icky black potions, but a beautiful dungeon nonetheless. They cannot have this much RP in a dungeon.
Yeah, I think this as well. Like there needs to be a balance between like making the dungeons that fit the themes they want to tell in the stories, and then having the M+ versions be something that you will enjoy running as repeatable content over the course of the expansion. I would favor something like normal, heroic, and mythic difficulties having the angel flights as they intend, and then in M+, maybe they can come and be like, all right, that's not going to be great for our repeatable content. Let's chop 2 minutes off this timer and let's make it like a 2-second teleport that you can see your character like turn into an anima orb and just get shot up there, right? Like it's really not that going to hurt our immersion that bad, and it's going to make the dungeon so much more enjoyable on the 100th run of the expansion or the 1000th.
I think as well, like, oh, gosh, it's one of those things that like the right. How did you feel about the right and left side dichotomy? I'll let you feel this one first.
Yeah, so I went left maybe 5 times in my life.
Okay.
Maybe 3 of them I was aware that it was bad, but I was just like, I want to do something different, see what's up here, see if anything's changed.
It was easier to go left at the beginning of the expansion.
Yeah, I remember being a fan of left in 9.0, but I remember pretty quick it became right meta.
Yeah, because right is a lot faster, so you would be forced. So the reason that left was the reason that like right was faster is because like the double Goliath and like just the amount of count that you're getting from the right side is a lot better, and the left side has a lot of squad leaders. I think that squad leaders and like AoE DRs They have to be very careful with those. I think that they absolutely added too many into Spires of Ascension. I don't think that those are like a mob that's completely off limits, but I think if you're going to do that, you should use them very sparingly, and utilize them as ways to limit pull size as opposed to a mob that is seen like 4 times in the dungeon or whatever. Like if it's on a mini boss that you don't want people to pull trash into, I don't love it, but I kind of understand it. But if it's used on a mob that's just like around the key over and over again, it's like, okay, this is going to be a problem mob. So people then start CCing literally every single mob around the squad leaders. Then they kill the squad leader solo, and then they do the pack by itself, and that's by itself just not that great of design.
Yeah, I agree. The squad leaders weren't great. The way that kind of pulling in this dungeon worked, like this is probably the dungeon that developed the most kind of rigid pull structure, right? It's like, okay, we kill the first boss, we go left and we kill 2 packs, we go right and kill everything. We, you know, like that, we do the same thing. We either kill that squad leader pack or we kill like one more pack when we get upstairs. And then, you know, you're doing the exact same thing as like a lot of other groups in there.
I'm having a realization. This is by far my least favorite dungeon. I'm pretty sure I'm about ready to slam this in D tier, because then we also have triple angels that we haven't even covered. Like I think
and Devos as well. The 7-year encounter at the end of the dungeon.
Mechanically, the bosses aren't even bad in here. It's just like,
actually, I think Ventanax is one of my favorite dungeon bosses in terms of like relative to not having any crazy mechanics, just like one that's kind of fun to do. I quite like Ventanax.
I guess in theory, like bosses never really carry dungeons though. Like even strong bosses are very infrequently going to carry a dungeon, and like bad bosses are definitely going to detract from a dungeon in a more meaningful capacity, like Devos, the 7-year encounter are, or like some of the really absurd RP or trash. Those are gonna like also detract. I'm down to slam this in D. Like I think that the more we talked about it, the more I realized that I just did not like this key every single time I had to run it.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with D on this as well. For me, it is definitely one where like I'm not sure if I have a more negative visceral reaction to it than I do to like Wake or Plaguefall even, but I'm down for D because I think as we've talked through it, it does sound like these are a more broad and potentially in some cases egregious set of mistakes with it.
Let's try to be a little bit more fair here. Like, what are some things that like you did like, or we should try to learn from this key? Because I don't like to just like swipe this as universally negative, even though this is like probably by far the worst key, and there were a lot of really bad mistakes here.
I enjoyed the way the Kyrian Spear pulls worked out in a couple spots.
Okay,
like getting that right pack with the the double pull with the Kyrian Spear, and it's like, oh, this is a really dangerous pack. But if you can kill it during this AoE CC, right? If you can pop your cooldowns and AoE really hard, maybe you can do it. Those sorts of things I think are kind of interesting. So I like that. I think first boss, second boss, third boss, all pretty good boss encounters. The third boss had a lot of like the third boss worked pretty well if you just did it like it said on the tin, but it also offered a degree of like mechanical mastery you could get if you understood how to like walk under it and trigger the stomp, and if you understood when that was a good thing to do versus when it was a bad thing to do for speeding up or slowing down the next phase. So I think that, I do think boss encounters, aside from, honestly, even Devos mechanically is pretty fun. It's just like this thing does not die on tyrannical difficulty, which is a pain.
Yeah, all right, that makes sense. All right, Theater of Pain. I think that five boss rush dungeons got to go. Like I just think in theory, I'm not a fan of just this design as a whole. We've had it a couple of times now where it's like 5 boss dungeons where mostly the bosses are the premier like part of this key. I think just as a whole, the blueprint is not working out, at least in my mind, because Koltharok, Zav, Koltharok and Zav are obviously the major offenders, but even Mordretha is by itself like not even that great of an encounter, and Gorchop is like decent but not great, and then you just have like 5 bosses inside of the dungeon, and it's obviously going to be limiting like how much you're pulling, and then on top of it like rigid tunnels. It's like, okay, this is not the dungeon design I'm looking for, and I don't think it's the way that Mythic Plus should be going. I think if the developers are looking to learn anything from Theater Pain, the design of TOP, just how you're doing that key, is not one that players necessarily want to do, because even though you have the illusion of choice from which direction you're going in which order, it doesn't feel different enough, even whenever you are going these different routes.
Yeah, I think that one thing that to put a more positive spin on it, one thing I appreciate about Theater Pain is like if you're in a group with like a bunch of raiding characters in single target builds, Theater Pain can be a pretty fun dungeon, right? Because it's like, oh, this is a dungeon with 5 bosses and 30 mini bosses scattered throughout it, right? And so it's like, oh, single target specialists can have a good time here. And I think that's something that is potentially worth preserving. I actually think that we see in Streets of Wonder a bit of iteration on this, where it's like, oh, if you want to go left after the first boss, you can fight kind of small numbers of big healthy mobs, and if you want to go right, you can fight big pulls instead. But in Theater Pain, it's like, oh, if you want to go left, you can fight these AoE pulls. You have to go left every time, right? You can do it first or third, but you have to go that way every time, right? You have to go to the Zap Wing every time. And like, yeah, you could choose what you want to skip, but I think that instead of offering us optionality in terms of sequencing, I think is a good thing to offer as well.
Yeah,
but also offering us the optionality of like, do you want some mini bosses or do you want some trash?
I actually do think that you made a great point there about Streets of Wonder. So Streets of Wonder is also a 5 boss dungeon, and I thought it was actually done quite well. I do quite like Streets. There's something about Theater of Pain that feels very much Upper Karazhan reminiscent, Workshop reminiscent, where it's just very linear.
Yeah, exactly. It's the single target intensity of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The single target intensity of it is quite high for me, and it's like, okay, I don't like that just conceptually.
When we look back at 5 boss dungeons, there are some like the lower is a 5 boss dungeon as well, right?
Yeah.
Before. Yeah, there's been a few at Archway. Depending on your take on Archway, some liked, some didn't.
Lower was
that 5 or 4?
Lower was a 4 boss dungeon. Archway was 5.
Archway was 5. Okay.
Archway was 5.
Halls of Valor was 5, right? Yeah.
Archway and Halls of Valor were both 45-minute keys, by the way.
That's true. Yeah. All right. Maybe 5 is just all as bad.
It's tough because like the timer is always just brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, DOS was like a 39-minute timer, wasn't it?
They upped it to 41. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So DOS being a 40-minute key is tough. Necrotic Wake. What is Necrotic Wake right now? DOS was a 39. I think that Necrotic Wake was, or not Necrotic Wake. Was Theater of Pain right now? I think that Theater of Pain is also a 39. I know that Sanguine Depths is also 39. Or at least
it sounds right.
Sanguine Depths is 39 right now. I think that Theater of Pain, you're just gonna start running into issues where it's like 5 boss dungeons. They cannot incorporate just like this heavy single target element. More often than not, players are looking to do Mythic Plus for the AoE and the trash design. I did actually appreciate the fact that MM Hunter and Arms Warrior were just kind of low-key blasters in this key the whole entire expansion and when Walker Monks were just like low-key blasters in this key. But like I didn't appreciate it enough to be like, oh yeah, this is a great dungeon.
So that's kind of the Streets of Wonder point where it's like I like the idea of there being a niche for small target classes, right? Potentially 1 target, 2 target, 5 target classes, especially if they're going to target cap stuff, which thankfully they're not. They backed off a little bit on that, but especially in the universe that they were. But I think instead of making it a dungeon, it should be like an optional part of several dungeons is something that like if you happen to be in an Arms Warrior group, like, hey, let's pull this stuff in dungeons like Streets of Wonder instead of the other stuff.
So there actually were points that I liked. I actually really liked. I thought that Kultharok Wing just was decently designed. I didn't love the Zav with the Gortop Wing per se, but I thought that the Kultharok Wing was, for one, it was balanced pretty decent to the point where you could basically go to any platform of your choice and you never felt like you were making a major mistake. You could fight the Bone Reaver with the Bone Mages if you were like a super coordinated group. You were going to get the kicks. You were going to kill a bunch of the Bone Mages. That was sick. Alternatively, you could go the very easy route and do the double tornado dudes, which like those mobs were free, and that was a more pug-friendly route, that kind of thing. I really liked the optionality of the Kultharok area and just the ability to kind of be able to pick and choose which pulls you were doing in that wing.
I think the Kultharok Wing does a really good job of being a wing where it's like, do you have a curse spell? Oh, this ring is, this makes these pulls slightly better. Do you have a purge? Oh, that makes these pulls slightly better. Do you have extra interrupts or solar beam, or are you low on interrupts? And all of those things will change your priority in your head of like which of these pulls look good and which of these pulls don't. But it doesn't make any of them impossible, right? But like a curse spell in there, it's nice. You don't drop those shadow puddles under you. You don't get shadow vulnerability on the guardian. So I think there's some good examples of stuff that we always talk negatively when there's a problem with curse spells. That's an example of when there's not a problem with curse spells. The Kultharok Wing.
Probably C.
Yeah, I'm fine with C for
it's either C or D, but like
give it a C.
It's one of those things of like, God.
Look, this is aesthetic as well. We've got all 3 of the Necrolord themed dungeons in C.
This one's close between C and D. I think that this is like okay, Sengi D.
Yeah, this one is a bit of a polarizing dungeon because it's certainly one of the ones where, like, if you're doing a weekly 15, you type exclamation point keys in your group. Sanguine Depths is one where you're like, all right, not that one, right? We go to one of these other dungeons
it's
instead.
So weird.
Yeah, but among high key pushers, it's one of the ones that people are like, oh yeah, this one, you know, like there's a ton of opportunity for skill expression here, right? There's a ton of really intense boss fights. The Covenant mechanic of the lanterns, and the way that they operate offers, I think, a downside is sort of a snowbally nature to your run, where it makes it extremely punishing for things to go a little bit wrong. But the upside is there's a huge opportunity for good play to lead to great results there. So
exactly. And then the timer, if you are able to capitalize on those things, is very free. Like if you're able to really, you don't even have to like do crazy stuff to snowball your run. But if you're doing like medium-sized lantern pulls and able to capitalize on the buffs and be able to snowball your key, you're going to be able to have a free time with the timer. I think that a lot of people look down on this dungeon just due to the intensity that the bosses have presented themselves at basically the whole expansion. So Crixus, Borrelia, and Tarvald were basically the 3 hardest bosses of the whole entire expansion, probably for most of the expansion. I would say there was some like Ventinac stuff, but that guy was a bad dude. There was some Surgeon Stitchflesh stuff. That guy still a bad dude, but the Sanguine Depths bosses had 3 of the hardest bosses in the same key together, and I think that a lot of people are going to just kind of give it negative feedback due to the difficulty of the mechanics on the bosses, and it's challenging for me to be able to distinguish it from my own anecdotal experiences, because I did not mind a lot of parts of Sanguine Depths, but at the same point it was like super snowbally. I thought that the Call Gauntlet, if you're going to design a trash gauntlet, that's probably how it should look. I thought that the Call encounter and the gauntlet itself was pretty decent. One of the biggest downsides, I thought that the Overseers are poorly designed mobs. I had this criticism whenever beta was live as well. I think that any mob that's giving you a stacking damage dealt decrease, no, like please. I had the same issue in Spires of Ascension, where it's like, okay, if there's one mini boss and you're gonna put like an AoE DR on it, I hate it, but I get it. If again, there are like 3 or 4 Overseers that you have to pull in Sanguine Depths that are putting this damage reduction on you. Nah, please stop that. Like it's not a good design to be putting DRs on players like that.
Yeah, so I think that's one way to express this is like less coordinated, less quick groups are going to experience much harder versions of the bosses are just ones that are really tough if you're not playing with a group that like knows what they're doing, and especially not one that's like not communicating, right? These are bosses that punish that, where there's a lot of dungeons where you can kind of get away with it, right? Like you know what to do on all the other ones and it's kind of individual play.
Yeah.
The pug route as well. Like if you just hold W and don't skip stuff, the trash between the first boss and the second boss is you're going to have to fight some difficult and slow pulls in there if you are unable or unwilling to use skips. So yeah, this is very much a dungeon where it's like I think there are things that work out really well for the high end groups, but I do think there were ones that made it a lot lower for the lower end groups, and I don't think those two things need to be in contest with each other. I think you could fix it for the lower end groups without making it much worse or worse at all, even for the higher end groups. Like there are ways you could lower the difficulty of the boss fights in such a way that it still scales to be hard in high keys, but is less difficult on 15. I've advocated for some mechanics scaling less hard with key level, but I think there's also an argument to be made that certain mechanics should like do the inverse of that and should be especially nerfed on low keys, because those are the groups that struggle with them the most and the groups that lack the coordination to do them the correct way.
How did you feel about this dungeon and how it impacted with the affixes just generally? Like notably like Sanguine and just other on-death affixes?
My biggest complaint actually is on-death affixes in the general call. Trash Gauntlet is
most of them don't interact with there.
There's a few of the packs that do, right? Like
just the cadets.
Just the cadets. Yeah. On the cadets is a crime. Those should not drop Sanguine. Change my mind.
Not going to, because I agree. Like, I think that overall, this is more of an upgrade to like Waycrest Manor. If you're comparing this to a key, it's probably like more in line with like Waycrest. With
right, well, yeah, because the problem with Sanguine and Waycrest and Sanguine Depths is like narrow corridors, tight confines, right?
Yeah.
I actually don't hate the way that Sanguine operates in this dungeon too much. Like, okay, maybe it's a bit annoying, but like,
you have the lanterns and stuff that you have to deal with.
Yeah, and with the new smaller AOE on the lanterns as well, this patch that's gotten worse as well. But I think Sanguine management in here, like, I think it's exacerbated by the fact that a lot of the pulls are so brutal in the way the trash mobs operate themselves. But I don't think that ranks near the top of my complaints in the dungeon.
I would probably be inclined to put this in B tier with DOS. I would say this is even ahead of DOS in my mind. I think that this key is okay. Like there's a decent number of problems. I think that the large discrepancy between high end and low end players in this dungeon, like the differing experience that you're going to receive, kind of similar to Wake. It's not good, but like at the same point, you kind of, if you're a player who's like doing a pug route or whatever, you understand what you could do to necessarily go faster. I do think that it's a bit of a disservice to have them pull W and play almost objectively bad pulls, though.
Yeah, I will say, I think that this B tier Sanguine Depths is like, there are high key pushers I know of that have this as their favorite Shadowlands dungeon, and some that have it as like their favorite not close. And then there are also like pug groups I know where it's as bad as King's Rest for people that have a pugging experience. Yep. So this is really one that, like, depending on your experience in this dungeon, I could really see it fluctuating from S to D. And that's why it's an acronym is SD.
Yep. I think that overall I'm down to put in B. All right, so let's look at what I had for Shadowlands on beta.
Let's compare.
So some of these dungeons got changed. Okay. So
it's actually fairly close. We got you had Hall's Mists. Your opinion stayed the same. Sanguine stayed the same. You've gotten a lot higher on DOS. They added more time to that. You gotten lower on Theater, a little higher on Plaguefall, and lower on Spires. But I mean, you're within a tier of everything here. This is pretty consistent. Yeah,
that checks out.
Yeah, and
I think that they reworked Plaguefall multiple times since I made this video. By the way,
they improved Plaguefall, and they did add time to the DOS timer as well.
The DOS, I do remember specifically, the DOS was an issue of bosses. I thought
they fixed Hakar.
I thought that Moizal and Hakar, and I probably still do believe this, are some of the worst boss designs ever. Like, where it's like, okay, Hakar with the shield, and I'm like, dude, we're having another one of these, whatever this second boss of Borealis is, where she would keep jumping on the ship. I was like, dude, we're having another one of these. Like, I have to fight waves of ads, or whatever. Where it's like, the boss is shielded, and I can't kill him. And then it's just like, the Moizal is like, I have to DPS these totems, and I'm not interacting with the boss. I just didn't like either of those bosses, and I thought they were major deterrents, and then some of the trash. Which I guess that my opinion on this is definitely softened a bit. I think that the good parts of this key are able to carry it a bit more than whatever I initially made, slammed it into D, because I do like the Art of Wield Wing. I really like it.
So yeah, overall, we found a lot of positives with the dungeons this expansion. I think my biggest takeaway, the one thing that we didn't really talk about on a dungeon by dungeon basis, but like, it really is more optionality, more. I'm not saying it's bad if there's like a path. I think it's great if there's a path that like is on a road that pug groups can hold W on and that works well. I think that's something that when dungeons lacked that in previous expansions, it was a drawback. But the ability to go off the beaten path, to pull slightly different stuff, to adjust your order, those sorts of things are things that I've really missed this expansion in a lot of dungeons. So that's my biggest request that we haven't talked about yet.
One thing I want to reiterate is like the ability to have creative freedom of your pathing is going to keep it's going to keep the dungeons fresh, right? Like it's going to keep the keys fresh, and that's why Halls of Atonement, at least in my mind, is S, because you could do this dungeon in like 3 different groups and you're getting 3 different routes.
Yeah, I think that our biggest disagreements, like, I think I'm probably a little bit higher on you wanted Plaguefall in D, right? Or Theater. You wanted one of those dungeons in D, or we settled on C, right?
I think it was probably
and then
both, honestly.
I also wanted Halls in A and not in S. So, but we're pretty close otherwise. So this is a fine, I think, representation of the synthesis of our expectation here. Yeah, you can see it does skew a little bit below average, right? A little bit less than the 50-50 line here with B in the middle. So not the greatest so far.
Hazamash
is missing here,
passing
though.
grade.
Yeah, I think Tazavesh would lift the average as well when were we to add that to
I would
this tier
definitely
list as well.
I would definitely say the Tazaveshes are at least this SAB range. I don't.
Yeah. So, all in all, lessons to learn here. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, cool. Where are we wrong? Are we bozos?
Change our minds.
Dude, we've been actually getting a lot of comments from our fans in the comment section.
Thanks to the commenters in the comment section. We need you so much for the algorithm. We appreciate you being there.
Shout out to the commenters.
Shout out to the commenters, the real heroes. All right. We'll catch you guys next week.
Later.